Welcome to the iMedix podcast. Today, we're taking a deep dive into the realities of what is being called the post-Ozempic era.
Yeah, it's a massive topic right now.
It really is. And I want you, the listener, to just imagine something for a second. Imagine taking a medication that helps you lose, say, 50 pounds, right? Only to discover that underneath your new, smaller wardrobe, you've rapidly aged your body's structural foundation by like 20 years.
Which is terrifying.
Exactly. You look fantastic at a photo, but your metabolic engine has been quietly hollowed out. And that is the hidden, really complex medical puzzle occurring right under our noses with the explosion of GLP-1 agonists.
Right, because we are seeing unprecedented, miraculous weight loss on a population level, but we are ignoring a deeply complex biological reality happening on a cellular level.
Yeah, and our mission today is to pull back the curtain on that crisis. We're going to investigate what actually happens to your body's internal machinery specifically, muscle protein synthesis, and your baseline metabolism when your appetite is artificially suppressed for months or, even years.
And critically, what occurs the moment that medication is stopped.
Right. Because this isn't just a conversation about dropping a dress size. I mean, it's about fundamentally altering how the human organism processes and stores energy.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to move past the surface level hype of the scale just going down.
Absolutely.
And we need to ask the central question of this deep dive. What exactly happens to muscle protein synthesis when you suppress appetite with GLP-1 agonists?
Well, to answer that, we really have to look at the pharmacology of these drugs compared to our native biology, So GLP-1, or glucagon-like peptide 1, is a hormone naturally produced by the L cells in our gut when we eat.
Okay, so it's something we already make.
Exactly. Its native job is to signal the pancreas to release insulin, but it also travels up to the hypothalamus in the brain to signal satiety. It basically tells your brain, hey, we have food, you can stop eating.
Right, the fullness signal.
Yeah, but the catch is that natural GLP-1 has a half-life of about 2 minutes before an enzyme called DPP-4 comes along and just destroys it. 2 minutes. Wow, so our natural fullness signal is incredibly fleeting.
Very.
It gets the job done for a single meal, and then it just vanishes, which is, I guess, why we get hungry again a few hours later.
Precisely. And that fleeting nature is exactly what pharmaceutical companies engineered away. Drugs like semaglutide modify the amino acid sequence of the hormone just enough to evade that DPP-4 enzyme.
So the enzyme can't break it down anymore.
Right. Instead of a 2-minute half-life, the synthetic version has a half-life of about 165 hours.
Oh, wow. That is a massive difference.
It's huge. You inject it once a week, and it binds to the GLP-1 receptors in the hypothalamus continuously. It hyperstimulates the POMC neurons, which drive that feeling of fullness, and it actively suppresses the AGRP neuron.
And the AGRP neurons are the ones that...
They drive the primal urge to seek out food. So the constant craving, the food noise is just chemically muted.
And from a purely mathematical weight loss perspective, muting the food noise sounds like the holy grail.
Yeah.
The patient simply forgets to eat, or they take 3 bites of a meal and feel Thanksgiving levels stuffed.
Yeah, the caloric deficit is massive and honestly effortless for the patient.
But this triggers an unintended physiological cascade, which brings me to this analogy I like to use. Think of it like shutting down a busy factory supply line. If you cut caloric intake by 50 or 60%, no raw materials like food or nutrients are coming in.
Right, the supply trucks just stop showing up.
Exactly. And the factory can't just burn off its excess inventory, which would be the fat. It also stops repairing and building its structural foundation. It stops muscle protein synthesis.
What's fascinating here is that the human body doesn't operate like a perfectly logical business, prioritizing fat loss above all else.
Right.
Muscle protein synthesis, or MPS, is an incredibly energy-intensive biological process where your body repairs and builds new muscle tissue. Muscle is biologically very expensive.
Expensive in terms of calories.
Exactly. To build or even just maintain it, your body relies on a master biological switch called the mTOR pathway, specifically mTORC1. And this pathway requires a constant influx of energy and specific amino acids, primarily leucine, to stay activated.
Okay, I want to introduce a little pushback here, or maybe just voice the skepticism a lot of people might be feeling.
Sure.
If losing weight, if curing obesity is the ultimate goal here, why is this appetite suppression suddenly being framed as a problem? Let's use that corporate analogy again.
Okay, let's hear it.
The body has massive cash reserves, right? That's the stored body fat. If revenues drop to zero because the drug is suppressing the appetite, shouldn't the body's CEO just seamlessly authorize burning through those fat reserves to keep the company's structural foundation, the muscle, fully operational.
It makes sense logically, but the body's CEO doesn't view muscle as the structural foundation. It views muscle as a massive, ongoing payroll expense.
Ah, right.
When you induce a radical caloric deficit, the body's energy sensor, an enzyme called AMPK, detects a drop in cellular fuel. Think of AMPK as the biological fuel gauge.
So the fuel gauge hits empty.
Right. And when fuel is low, AMPK sounds the alarm and actively phosphorylates, or basically blocks, the mTOR pathway. The body's essentially saying, we are in a famine. We cannot afford the metabolic cost of maintaining this muscle tissue.
Wow. So it downregulates muscle protein synthesis.
Yeah, and it actually begins catabolizing or breaking down its own lean mass to free up amino acids for more vital organ functions.
So the triage system isn't just spending the cash reserves, it's actively laying off the maintenance crew and selling off the factory equipment just to save on daily operating costs.
That is exactly what is happening, and we see this biological tension play out in the clinical data. There's this hope versus hype dynamic.
Right.
The hope, heavily fueled by marketing, is pure, unadulterated fat loss. You take the weekly injection, the adipose tissue just melts away, and you reveal a perfectly preserved, healthy physique underneath.
But the reality is different.
Very different. The biological reality is that intense chronic appetite suppression starves the mTOR pathway. The body senses a chemical famine and aggressively downregulates muscle repair.
I want you, the listener, to put yourself in this situation for a second. Imagine stepping on a Bapcom scale every single morning. You are celebrating every time that digital number drops.
You feel great.
Right, your joints feel a bit better, your clothes are falling off you, and society is giving you constant positive reinforcement. But you are entirely unaware that beneath the surface, your internal engine, that muscle protein synthesis, has completely stalled. You are shrinking, but you don't realize what you are shrinking.
And this brings us to a highly concerning clinical consequence. When the body catabolizes its own lean tissue for energy over a period of, say, 12 to 18 months, we cross the boundary from cosmetic weight loss into the territory of a very serious medical condition.
And that condition is sarcopenia, which is really the silent threat of the post-Ozempic era. Most people associate the word sarcopenia with advanced aging, right? We picture someone in their 80s becoming frail, needing a walker, or struggling to just stand up from a chair. It's usually a slow, decades-long decline.
Yes, but we are now observing that decades-long decline compressed into a matter of months in much younger populations taking GLP-1 agonists.
That is terrifying.
It is. Sarcopenia isn't merely having smaller biceps, you know. It is a detrimental loss of skeletal muscle mass and functional strength, what we call dynapenia.
So it's about function, not just looks.
Right. The general public often harbors this dangerous misconception that muscle is merely aesthetic, just something reserved for athletes or bodybuilders. But functionally, skeletal muscle is your body's primary metabolic sink.
It is the main disposal site for glucose, right?
Exactly. About 80% of postprandial glucose, the sugar in your blood after a meal, is absorbed by skeletal muscle tissue through GLUT4 receptors.
Wow, 80%.
Yeah. Furthermore, muscle acts as an endocrine organ. It releases proteins called myokines that regulate systemic inflammation and communicate with your bones, brain, and liver.
It's doing so much more than just lifting things.
It's the engine that drives your resting metabolic rate. It provides the mechanical stress on your bones required to prevent osteoporosis. Muscle is vital metabolic tissue.
So when a patient on a GLP-1 agonist steps on a scale and sees they've lost 50 pounds, the danger is the assumption that all 50 of those pounds were just fat.
Which is almost never the case.
Right. If we look at the clinical trial data, specifically studies using DEXA scans, which use dual energy X-ray absorptiometry to precisely differentiate bone density, fat mass, and lean tissue, the results are staggering.
They really are. In normal, unassisted weight loss, you might expect 20 to 25% of the lost weight to be lean mass.
Okay, so a quarter of it.
Right. But the DEXA scans on GLP-1 patients are frequently showing that up to 39 or 40% of the weight lost is lean functional mass.
Wait, that sounds counterintuitive. I have to play devil's advocate here.
Go for it.
If you are curing obesity, right? If you have a patient dealing with sleep apnea, high cholesterol, severe joint pain, and you help them drop 60 pounds, aren't you objectively getting them healthier? The BMI chart says they are healthier. How can losing that massive amount of weight be framed as a negative?
It is the ultimate clinical dilemma of our modern pharmacological era. We really have to distinguish between immediate symptom relief and long-term metabolic risk.
Okay, break that down.
Removing 60 pounds of mass from a patient's frame provides undeniable, immediate biomechanical relief. Their knees will hurt less because they're carrying less load. Their sleep apnea might resolve because there is less tissue compressing their airway at night.
Right, the immediate symptoms get better.
But if a massive portion of that lost weight was functional muscle, you haven't necessarily engineered a biologically healthier person in the long run. You've created a phenomenon known as sarcopenic obesity.
Sarcopenic obesity, meaning they're cosmetically smaller, maybe wearing a medium instead of an extra large, but their actual ratio of muscle to fat is worse than when they started.
Exactly. They become smaller but infinitely more frail. They have less muscle to clear glucose, meaning their underlying insulin resistance might actually worsen over time despite the scale going down.
That is wild.
And they have lower bone density, increasing fracture risk. They have less strength to catch themselves if they trip. Frailty ultimately is one of the leading predictors of all-cause mortality as we age.
This places the primary care physician in a brutal dilemma. Think about it. The patient is sitting in the exam room, absolutely thrilled. They are finally succeeding at weight loss after decades of failed diets. They are smiling, they feel lighter.
Right.
And the doctor has to look at their body composition data and basically play the bad guy, telling them, I am deeply concerned about your underlying structural integrity.
The medical community requires a massive paradigm shift here. We can no longer blindly celebrate gravity pulling less on a human body. The fundamental question must evolve from how much weight did you lose to what exactly is your body now composed of?
Because if we're just inducing sarcopenia to cure clinical obesity,
we are simply trading an immediate cardiovascular crisis for a devastating frailty crisis a decade down the line.
which brings us to the third part of our investigation, and honestly the most terrifying phase of this entire journey.
The discontinuation phase.
Yeah, because the reality is people don't want to stay on a $1,000 a month injection forever. Whether it's due to insurance changes, gastrointestinal side effects, or simply reaching a goal weight, a massive wave of patients will inevitably stop taking semaglutide.
It's inevitable.
And the medical literature points to a deeply alarming phenomenon that follows. So how does the metabolic adaptation phase cause rapid weight rebound once you stop taking semaglutide?
This is the moment the biological bill comes due. When a patient stops a GLP-1 agonist, that chemical blockade on the hypothalamus vanishes.
The artificial suppression ends.
Right. The POMC neurons are no longer stimulated, and the ATRP hunger neurons are suddenly unmuted. The biological drive to eat returns to its native state.
To give this some historical context, we saw a very similar rebound effect in the 1990s with very low-calorie diets, or even in studies tracking contestants on extreme weight loss reality shows.
Yes, the Biggest Loser studies.
Exactly.
Yeah.
People would undergo severe caloric restriction, lose massive amounts of weight, and then rapidly regain it all. The difference here is that GLP-1 agonists remove the agonizing psychological willpower required to endure the restriction.
But the biological consequences of the restriction remain completely intact. If we connect this to the bigger picture, we must examine the body's deeply ingrained survival mechanisms.
Okay.
Over the 12 or 18 months that this patient was eating drastically fewer calories, their body was busy adapting to what it perceived as a famine.
Right.
As the fat cells shrank, they produced less leptin. Leptin is the hormone that communicates your long-term energy stores to the brain. This drop in leptin triggers a systemic downregulation of the basal metabolic rate.
This is where I like to use an analogy. People often compare it to a tightly coiled spring. The drug holds the spring down, suppressing the weight and the appetite.
Yeah, that's a common one.
And the moment you take the pressure off, when you stop the drug, the spring doesn't just gently expand, it violently snaps back.
It's a violent biological reaction, yes.
It's like a thermostat in a house during a brutal winter blizzard. The drug essentially opens all the windows in the house by forcing a massive caloric deficit. To keep the house from completely freezing to death, the body's central heating system, the metabolism, turns itself down to a bare pilot light just to conserve its limited fuel.
That's a great way to visualize it. It downregulates the thyroid axis, reducing the conversion of T4 to active T3 hormone. This physically lowers the body's core temperature and makes mitochondria hyper-efficient.
Meaning they waste fewer calories as heat.
Exactly. And the adaptation extends far beyond just the thyroid. The brain drastically reduces something called NEAT, or non-exercise activity thermogenesis.
Which is what exactly?
These are the calories you burn doing subconscious movements, fidgeting at your desk, pacing while on a phone call, maintaining perfect posture, or even just gesturing with your hands while you speak.
Things you don't even realize you're doing.
Right. In a state of prolonged caloric restriction, the brain subconsciously eliminates these movements to preserve energy. You become physically lethargic without even realizing it.
Wow.
Furthermore, because the patient lost a significant amount of metabolically demanding muscle tissue due to the sarcopenia we discussed, their daily caloric expenditure is objectively vastly lower than it was before they started the drug.
Let me map out the timeline of this perfect storm then. You stop taking the injection. Within a week or two, the synthetic hormone clears your system. Your hunger comes roaring back to 100% capacity.
Or more.
Right, it might surge to 120% because your depleted fat cells are screaming for leptin, driving this overwhelming biological urge to recover from the famine.
The appetite returns to baseline, or higher, like you said.
But the body you are feeding the house with the pilot light is now operating at a massive metabolic disadvantage. Your metabolism is burning 20 to 30% fewer calories due to the missing muscle mass, the suppressed thyroid function, and the vanished NEAT.
It's a trap.
You close the windows, but the pilot light is still barely flickering. Suddenly, the house is flooded with fuel from your returning appetite. The body doesn't have the metabolic machinery to burn that fuel, so it aggressively stores it in the basement.
The clinical term for this is collateral fattening. The rebound is severe and mathematically predictable. Studies tracking patients after discontinuing semaglutide show they regain a significant majority of the weight within 12 months.
Just 12 months.
Yes. But here is the truly devastating part. Because their mTOR pathway is still sluggish and they lack the biological drive to build muscle in a sedentary state, the weight they regain is almost exclusively adipose tissue.
Oh, man. So they lost a critical mixture of muscle and fat on the way down, but they gained back pure fat on the way up.
The body preferentially restores fat depots as a survival priority to protect against the next perceived famine. This means their body composition is objectively worse after the rebound than it was on day one.
That is heartbreaking.
They might return to their starting weight of, say, 250 pounds, but their body fat percentage is significantly higher and their lean mass is lower. They are now dealing with a more severe presentation of sarcopenic obesity.
This highlights such a tragic tension between patient expectations and medical reality. Patients view this drug as a bridge to a new life. They think, I will use this medication to reach my goal weight, and then I will easily maintain my new, smaller body through willpower and habit.
But they don't realize that the metabolic adaptation phase has rigged the game against them.
Exactly. They are fighting an evolutionary algorithm designed to force the weight back on at all costs. The underlying pathology of obesity hasn't been cured. It has merely been chemically masked, and it returns armed with a slower metabolism.
It underscores a profound misunderstanding of obesity as a chronic, relapsing disease. GLP-1 agonists are not a course of antibiotics that cure an infection. They are a treatment for a chronic condition, much like blood pressure medication.
So when you remove the treatment, the symptoms return.
Yes, often exacerbated by the structural degradation that occurred during the treatment phase.
This paints a deeply pessimistic picture.
Right.
The patient takes the drug, loses invaluable muscle, stops the drug, and gains back purely fat.
It sounds bleak, yes.
But the medical literature does offer a countermeasure, right? There's a specific active intervention that can disrupt this catabolic cascade. We need to explore the exact protocols required to survive this pharmacological intervention without destroying the body's structural foundation.
We do.
So what specific resistance training protocols and protein intake ratios are absolutely required to prevent sarcopenia on these drugs?
This is where we pivot from observing the pathology to engineering the solution. If the drug enforces a caloric deficit that actively suppresses the mTOR pathway, we have to find a biological bypass to artificially stimulate muscle protein synthesis.
We have to wake mTOR back up.
Exactly. We have to force the body to preserve its expensive muscle tissue, even when AMPK is screaming that there is a famine.
And the sources are unequivocal on this point.
Yeah.
Casual exercise, walking the dog or simply trying to eat a little better is entirely insufficient.
It is not enough. Cardiovascular exercise, while excellent for the heart, does not provide the specific stimulus required to halt sarcopenia in a severe caloric deficit. To counteract the catabolic pull, a patient must engage in targeted resistance training.
Lifting weights.
Heavy weights. This relies on a process called mechanotransduction. When you lift heavy weights, the physical stretch and tension on the muscle fibers activate sensors called integrins. Yes. And these integrins bypass the systemic energy state of the body and send a localized mechanical signal directly to the mTOR pathway.
So you are basically sending a loud physical distress signal to the body saying, hey, we are actively using this tissue to survive our current environment. Do not dismantle this factory equipment.
The mechanical tension overrides the starvation signal, but the protocol requires progressive overload lifting weights that genuinely challenge the muscle, ideally 2 to 3 times a week, targeting all major muscle groups.
That sounds simple, but it actually depends on a massive behavioral paradox. You can stimulate the mTOR pathway with heavy squats and deadlifts all day long, but you still need the raw building blocks to actually synthesize the new tissue, right?
You need protein.
Exactly. Specifically essential amino acids. So how do you force a patient to consume highly specific elevated ratios of protein when they are injecting a compound literally designed to obliterate their desire to eat?
It is incredibly difficult.
The thought of consuming a massive chicken breast or a dense whey protein shake when you are already dealing with drug-induced nausea or profound fullness sounds nearly impossible.
It is the most difficult aspect of the entire treatment protocol. It requires a fundamental, almost clinical shift in how patients interact with food. Food can no longer be viewed through the traditional lenses of pleasure, social connection, or even intuitive hunger.
It becomes a job.
Food must be viewed as a rigid medical prescription. Patients must prioritize protein above all other macronutrients.
Meaning, if a patient can only physically stomach 800 to 1,000 calories a day before feeling ill, a massive percentage of those precious calories must be allocated to pure protein.
Yes, they need to hit what we call the leucine threshold. Leucine is the specific essential amino acid that acts as the key to unlock the mTOR pathway.
How much do they need?
To adequately trigger muscle protein synthesis, a patient typically needs about 2.5 to 3 grams of leucine per meal, which translates to roughly 30 to 40 grams of high-quality protein per sitting.
And they have to do this even when they aren't hungry.
They must do this even when their brain is actively telling them they are full. They are essentially overriding a chemically induced satiety signal with force feeding of specific amino acids just to keep the cellular maintenance crew on staff.
So the drug performs the mathematically easy part, suppressing the appetite. But the patient bears the burden of the incredibly hard part, forcing themselves to consume specific amino acid profiles and lift heavy weights while operating in a state of severe energy depletion and potential lethargy.
And this raises an important question regarding personal choice versus system design, We have rapidly scaled a highly effective, immensely profitable system for distributing an appetite-suppressing pen. But we have fundamentally failed to design a parallel system to support the patient through the rigorous lifestyle engineering required to safely endure the treatment.
Right, we hand the patient the prescription, show them how to inject it into their abdomen, celebrate the initial weight loss, and say, see you in 6 months. There's no integrated physical therapist, no mandatory registered dietitian, and no continuous body composition monitoring.
We expect patients to act as passive recipients of a miracle drug, when in reality they must become active biohackers of their own physiology. If the medical community continues to prescribe GLP-1 agonists without mandating and supporting intense resistance training and strict dietary protein protocols, we are committing a massive clinical oversight.
We are inadvertently engineering a future population plagued by sarcopenia and severe metabolic rebound.
Exactly.
For you listening, the practical takeaway here changes the entire narrative around these medications. Watching the number on the scale plummet is only a fraction of the battle. Preserving your metabolically active lean mass through deliberate, heavy mechanical tension and forced, calculated protein intake, especially on the days you have absolutely zero desire to eat, is the sole determinant of whether this pharmacological deep dive is a lifelong success or just a temporary illusion that leaves you weaker and more vulnerable in the end.
It demands an entirely new level of biological literacy from the patient.
Okay, let's unpack this. So what does this all mean? Let's take a step back and survey the incredible biological landscape we've just mapped out today. We started by exploring the core mechanism of GLP-1 agonists, looking at how altering a hormone's half-life hijacks the hypothalamus to chemically mute the drive for food.
Right, bypassing DPP-4.
Then we saw how that profound caloric deficit triggers AMPK, which in turn silences the mTOR pathway, stalling out muscle protein synthesis. That led us to uncover the silent epidemic of the post-Ozempic era sarcopenia.
The loss of vital glucose-clearing muscle tissue.
Exactly, trading one form of obesity for a smaller, frailer, sarcopenic version of themselves. We then navigated the treacherous waters of metabolic adaptation, how a drop in leptin, a suppressed thyroid, and vanished NEAT create a perfectly hostile environment for rapid, fat-dominant weight rebound the moment the drug is stopped.
The collateral fattening.
And finally, we outlined the absolute necessity of mechanical tension and the leucine threshold using heavy resistance training and prioritized protein to artificially force the body to preserve its structural foundation.
The cascade we've detailed today involves highly intricate systemic physiological changes. And because we are dealing with powerful pharmacological agents and fundamental shifts in endocrinology, I must provide a serious medically responsible disclaimer here. The topics discussed today regarding semaglutide, sarcopenia, and metabolic adaptation are complex physiological processes. Listeners must consult a qualified healthcare professional before starting or stopping any medication or before implementing specific resistance training protocols or dietary protein ratios. This deep dive is for educational exploration, not personal medical advice.
Always, always consult your physician. As we close out today's investigation, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. Something that builds on this incredible biological tension between modern medicine and ancient biology. We've explored how fiercely our bodies react to chronic caloric restriction and how aggressively they deploy metabolic adaptation, lowering body temperature, halting subconscious movement, and sacrificing muscle just to ensure survival.
The body is incredibly resilient.
It is. So if our evolutionary programming is so remarkably efficient at entering this adaptation phase, and so desperate to force the weight to rebound the second we stop a synthetic intervention, are we ultimately fighting a chemical battle against an opponent, our own evolutionary biology, that simply has a much better memory than we do?
It reframes the entire concept of weight loss, doesn't it? We are attempting to outsmart millions of years of deeply ingrained survival software with a weekly peptide injection.
And that biological software is designed to never surrender a single ounce of stored energy without a fight. It is absolutely something to consider the next time you see a headline celebrating a completely effortless cure to a complex medical puzzle. The biological bill always eventually comes due. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.